We're in. All right. So here we are with Ben Crystal. Mike and I are going to talk to Ben about Shakespeare and just Shakespeare's influence on him and Shakespeare's influence on the world over the last couple hundred years, and just have a conversation about something that we all have a passion for. So
sounds delicious.
Wonderful. So I think I'll just start it off, and I'll just ask the obvious question here, Ben, and that's why Shakespeare? And why, after 400 years, is Shakespeare still relevant? Why is he still produced? Is he studied? Why is he still exalted after all these centuries?
So you're going to start with the big one then?
I'm going to start with the big one, yeah.
Well, it's either that or the meaning of life, Ben. So
right.
we have to.
You can pick one. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. Well, Douglas Adams took on the meaning of life pretty well. Gosh, I'm gonna separate out two strands of that, I think, because on the one hand, we have this guy and his body of work who is celebrated and exalted. And on the other hand, we have a body of work which is studied. And I find it rare for the two to join up. Like, why are these works, you know, why are we still with them, right? I mean, I got my reason. I guess
we want to hear your reason.
And my reason was I hated it in school. I hated reading it. I hated studying it. I started acting it, and it changed my life. Like that unification of audience and actor and text, that sort of tripartite holy, is like a holy triumvirate, I suppose, coming together, that seemed to be the final bit that links the circuit up and the electricity all whizzed around. And I've stuck with Shakespeare, or at least I've found Shakespeare to be a part of my daily life, my working life and my personal life, because I usually look to the sonnets for this, because the 154 little parcels of poetry, of love poetry, that will mean something to me every day that I look at them. And they'll mean something different to me every day I look at them. I relatively recently started reading the Tao and enjoyed it so much, I gifted it to people. I found this lovely little edition of it. And I think when you come to something like the Tao, the tendency might be to, or Shakespeare's sonnets, the tendency might be to read from left to right. And you won't make it past sonnet 18 or lesson 18 or whatever in the Tao if you do it that way. And I found myself approaching the Tao in a similar way that I found approaching the sonnets can be most useful. And I'll just flick and flip and see which one catches my eye, and see which version of myself today, which will be different depending on what kind of night's sleep I've had, or whether I had my heart broken again yesterday or tomorrow, or I've lost someone or gained something or whatever, right? Every day we're a different iteration of ourselves. And I found that every time I come to the sonnets, even one that I know really well, I understand it in a different way. It's like peeling the onion metaphor that they use so often in theater. And so approaching the Tao as a sort of which one resonates with me today, and then finding my way into the world of Shakespeare's sonnets that way too. And there are some that I've never really read. There's some that have never resonated with me yet. The first 16 or 17 are on that list. Maybe I don't like them very much, but then maybe when I become a father, I will, because they're sort of about having children. So I enjoy the fact that there's a finite body here that seems to have endless lessons for me, endless things to think about, endless reflections. And that's the key word, because they talk so much about Shakespeare holding the mirror up to life. And I find myself as an actor and a producer and a practitioner of Shakespeare enjoying very much, especially in a shared light dynamic, as it were, finding that meeting point between me and the text or the character, if it's, you know, a character text, and then allowing each to reflect each other, and then trying to angle that mirror out to the audience and sort of go, do you know what this feels like? Which is so different from a lot of Shakespeare acting, which has a tendency to not, as it were, share that with the audience and say, hey, isn't this interesting to feel this way? Aren't we an interesting species? But to go, oh God, it's so horrible feeling this way, and it's just a thing that people watch. So I guess one of the reasons why these works are exalted is because they're of the myriad different ways that they can show us things about who we are, and the way that seems to be entirely universal, no matter what or where you're from, what creed you have. You know, it really endlessly both offers me things to think about and opportunities to dig my acting teeth and muscles into, which of course actors love nothing better than, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And then on the other side, why do we study him? I think we've forgotten why we study him. I think that these feelings have been generated out of multiple generations of people enjoying the shows, going to see them, I mean, acting them, studying them, reading them. And those people probably had some degree of power or voice. And everyone thought, well, wouldn't these are important things. These are character building things. Let's make sure that children don't grow up without these things in them. And then we got to I suppose because of the education systems at the time, which very much like factory set, you sit and listen to someone speaking at you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're lucky, you might have been asked to stand up and read a piece behind your desk. But somehow these works of theatre, these works of the heart and of the voice, got smushed into the system of study and cerebral thought, and use literary critical techniques to take them apart. So I know why we should be encouraging younglings to look at his works. I don't know why we study them in the way that we do, because it nearly provided me with a life without Shakespeare. And it was only thanks to, luckily, being introduced to them in their natural habitat in the theatre that I'm lucky enough to be sitting here before you today.
Can I add two things to that?
Please.
So two things stuck out to me. One, I totally relate to what you said about there was a risk of you not liking it until you did it. Because I have the same exact story of that in multiple, not just Shakespeare, but in theater in general. And then two, what you said reminded me a lot of one of my favorite poets is Maya Angelou. And when she was a kid, she said she loved Shakespeare. I mean, it's not Shakespeare, poems in general. She loved poetry. And I think she said it to her grandma or her teacher. And they said, no, you can't love poetry until you speak it, until you feel it coming out of your mouth. You feel the words. And it kind of reminds me of what you're saying. Is that a fair connection there with the difference between observing it and then doing it?
100%. I think so. And so when I am asked how to introduce younglings to Shakespeare, my answer is there's 100 different versions of the same thing, no matter what the text is. And the text could be and should be perhaps Titus Andronicus more than Romeo and Juliet. And yes. The text should be the sonnets, because you're not having to worry about character or plot or anything else. And because they're in the first person, then there's a greater chance, even with young folk, that there might be a thought in there that will resonate with them. But I mean, you can read it silently or study it silently until the end of days, but to learn it by heart and to speak it with your heart's fire, sort of pushing it out rather than learning it by head to somehow, analyze it. It just, and goodness, you both teach, I suppose. What do they say? That, you never really learn something, you never really know something until you try to teach it. And part of that action, I think, is the taking of it in, the digestion of it from your short-term memory to your long-term memory, for it to sit inside you, and then for the fire of your heart to spark as you try to pass that knowledge on to someone else. And so often that's through word rather than physicality or what have you. And there's something about that route that on the way Shakespeare seemed to catch the fuel of the fire for. So he managed to write things that, for whatever reason, when you speak them out loud, something happens to them. It is that fusion of you and it, I think, that just imprints it on yourself in a different way. Now, just because I imprints it on yourself doesn't mean you're going to come away liking it, but it will have affected you in a completely holistic way than just silent pen. So yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think, in your opinion, when you're trying to introduce young people to Shakespeare, or even older folks who don't have a lot of experience with him, like, how would you go about introducing them? Like, how would you start them off? Like, if there's a group of kids in front of you and they've never done Shakespeare before or have never been introduced to him,
Wow.
what would you do? Like, what is your thought process? You know, like,
Pretty much talking about
instinctively.
me, Ben. He's talking about me.
I have spent much of my career sleight of handing acting techniques into the hands and mouths and hearts of non-actors. I think that, I mean, you know, apart from a bit like you were saying earlier, Mike, you know, when you're a self-employed creative, keeping as many different plates spinning, anything is useful, and ideally they all kind of feed into each other.
Yeah.
I wouldn't try to teach if I didn't also get to act it, and I wouldn't like to write if I didn't do both of those. And everything that I know about Shakespeare, everything that's made Shakespeare easier for me, hopefully anything that's made any shows I've produced entertaining to people, especially people that don't know Shakespeare, it's all come from an acting heart, an acting center. And I fundamentally believe that these plays and the sonnets are a little bit like musical scores. And it would be daunting to hand someone who's never played the violin before a violin and a bow and a score of Mozart's and say, go ahead and play. So I recognize very, very much that asking people who don't feel that they have any acting confidence to essentially become actors, if anything, has a danger of putting them off even more. So I spend as much time as I can thinking up cunning ways to create subterfuge to trick them into acting, I suppose. But then, you know, what is acting other than pretending that someone else's truth is yours? And so I guess if I have a bunch of younglings that haven't done Shakespeare before, there'll be a mixture of sparking their imagination, getting them physical, and creating somewhere like the Globe and what that environment would be like. Maybe we'll go outside to talk about some of the wilder characters that they may be interested in. The typical one is the fairies, the dream, and that sort of thing. Yeah. Although there's an awful lot of dream that's very dark, and there's an awful lot of dream with characters that aren't very accessible for youngers. Mm-hmm. But they can see the right and wrong between Leontes and Hermione in Winter's Tale in a heartbeat. The darker plays are really useful, I think, or the so-called darker plays can be really useful in helping youngers get into it. And it doesn't really matter what, but some text into their mouths and active. Oh, for a muse of fire. It's only, 5 words. But getting them all as early as possible into the idea of pouring themselves into that space of the O that's surrounded by that black line, which is an invitation from Shakespeare to express emotion. there's no one kid that could get that wrong. And they can all respond in their own way to that sound. And they may not be able to entirely grasp the idea of muse, but isn't that an interesting thing to talk about? And then how do you capture vocally, and perhaps physically too, the image of fire? How do you like wrest that into being? How do you make the word fire sound as powerful as the muse would want it, as it were? And do you physicalize that? Can you pour of that physicalization into your voice? I suppose it's all just about getting them. My father said this to me once. It was one of my very, very first gigs. I turned up to a school as a solo author for the first time, and I was supposed to be teaching 20 A-level students on Macbeth, and they changed their minds and hadn't told me, and I had 100 11-year-olds.
Oh man.
And no support staff. And I said, would you do this? And he said, no, not at all, but you know, you're special, right? And I was like, I don't know if I'm this special. And I called my dad up and he said, and I was like, I don't know whether I can do this. And he said, just think about the fact that you have an opportunity to sow a seed that will hopefully balance all of the potential negative experiences they have of Shakespeare to come.
Well said.
And so that's it, you know, it's become the core of my introduction to younglings, is leaving with something, just leaving with a positive experience, a little breathless, a little fun, a little sweaty, and a little excited about the toe dip that they've just had, rather than trying to somehow cram in the entirety of iambic pentameter, and who cares about that when you're young anyway, you know, all of that sort of stuff, to just give them a nice first drive of the car.
Yeah.
Well, I noticed that on Friday. Mike, I probably told you, Ben did a workshop with my students on Friday.
Yeah,
it was fantastic.
They were a great bunch.
Aren't they though? Like, I'm really lucky. I am
Really?
so lucky. And it was kids from like, I had 11-year-olds through 17, 18 years. It was everybody. It was like 40 kids. And the three kids that you had doing the
Renee,
the Macbeth
Hallie,
reading.
Lawrence, was it?
Yeah, it was Hallie,
Renee was another.
Renee, and Lorenzo.
Lorenzo. That's a good Shakespearean name.
Yes. So I think he's 12 maybe, like he's a seventh grader, and then the other two are seniors. But I think that really just showed, because Hallie and Renee both had experience. They were both in my show. I just did Pippin with them, and they were both in that. And during the final run, they were reading Hamlet, and so we'd have these great conversations in the hallway before they went on stage about Hamlet and everything. But Lorenzo had no experience with Shakespeare at all. You know, we don't even touch Shakespeare until 8th grade. So I think the fact that, you know, you got him involved and excited about it and having fun with it is a testament to what you just said, that, you know, if you open the door for them and show that it's actually fun and exciting, that they're going to respond to it. And I think that's exactly what happened.
I gave a CPD, a career professional development workshop to some teachers last year. A lot of English teachers that haven't done it for a long time, if they ever did. And of course, teach a lot of Austen and Dickens and all the other good English literature stuff too. And I had 25 minutes with them. So I got them all to take their shoes off, to stand in a circle and massage their feet with a tennis ball. And then got them to write out, just like I did with your kids the other day, I got them to write out the cue scripts of that first scene of Macbeth in 3 groups. And again, that's, you know, one of the oldest actor practices that they talk about, writing out your own part in your own hand, which kickstarts the memory process. And then in 10 minutes, these complete non-actors, awkward physically as all you would imagine from spending your lives in shoes and suits, were acting, and fully physically acting and vocally too, a performance-ready scene.
Mhm.
So it works with adults as well. I truly think that people that don't have access to Shakespeare or have had real trouble with him, it's because they've come to him through the most circuitous route. And there's this beautiful highway that's empty, waiting for anyone that wants. Just come to it from the point of view of theatre and acting, for goodness sakes. They're plays. He wrote theatre. Well, no wonder you're having trouble trying to read them like a book. But it was the way I was
preach, bro.
I was introduced to them this way. It makes everyone.
Yeah. Right.
Totally.
So can you talk a little bit about your background and how you discovered him? Like, what was the path that you took? You said that you hated him and then you loved him. So how did that happen?
I really lucky. This is my father's study. I've grown up surrounded by books. I'm not afraid of books. Although I was a late starter reading wise. I read comics for a long time. I think it was Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams actually that got me into reading books. And I've never really enjoyed classics. So when we got to study Thomas Hardy, the Mayor of Casterbridge in GCSE, I think it was. So that's sort of 15, 16 years old. Boy, I hated that. I still don't like that book. And I've never been particularly great at reading those kind of classic works, although I've forgotten the name of it now. Jane Eyre is one of my favorite books now. So I have found my way slowly towards it. I suppose I would go to see Shakespeare at the Royal Shakespeare Company with my folks, and I had a general sort of interest in theatre. And we studied Macbeth in school, and it was, as I described earlier, standing behind desks, reading out different bits. I wasn't afraid to stand up and read, and very few people in my class would, but I didn't particularly know what I was saying or know what it meant. And then we would laboriously get sort of taken through each scene and the important bits and that sort of thing. And I wasn't very good at English literature essays either. I say a lot. I've written books on Shakespeare, but I would probably fail an exam if I was past it now. So it was a generally miserable experience. And all this time I was playing the non-singing roles in the High School musicals and in lots of different character parts. And a director came to see us who was starting up a repertory company in the New Arts Centre nearby and asked me to audition. And she said she was doing The Tempest by Shakespeare. And I was like, it's not for me. She cast me as Ariel, the spirit of the air. And this would have been a couple of years later. So I was in a senior, I guess I was 17 or 18. I just passed my driving test, so I was 17. And we just finished studying King Lear in that same sort of process of sitting and everyone someone's standing up and reading from time to time. Mm-hmm. And it really just compacted how much I hated it all, because, now why though? It just didn't make sense. I didn't understand that my passion for it hadn't been ignited, I suppose. And I hadn't had room to play with these pieces. And I think that's the key missing thing in education as it stands, because we're not encouraging people to find their own Shakespeare. They're not encouraging to find their own freedom. We're not encouraging them to play in it and with each other. It's protected and it's important and you must respect it and don't muck about with it. And, you know, it's Shakespeare. And there's no room for play in all that. There's only room for essentially right and wrong. So I felt very, very much like I was being forced, you know, like trying to push a piece of string, like trying to sew a needle or something, you know, the eye of a needle. It just felt really difficult. And then we were rehearsing The Tempest outside in Wales, in a tempest, essentially. It was freezing, and it's a comedy, and weeks ago the jokes were funny and they're not anymore. So for a moment I was like, oh, I think I get this is fun when you're acting it. Oh, it's funny. Oh, this is great. Oh no, it's not funny anymore. oh God, now we're just like worrying about whether the audience are going to come, and it becomes less about Shakespeare, more about the show.
Yeah.
And then it all came together. And also, like, I didn't know what I was going to do the first night. How am I going to be a spirit of the air? There's no way to Peter Pan me around the space. I was outside wearing 2 pieces of silk.
I'm getting nervous just hearing this story. I'm sweating just, I feel like I'm about to go up and play Ariel now.
My friends are coming to watch me, like, and I was standing backstage about to leap on. Prospero's cue comes. It's a full house. And then I jumped out, and I don't remember what happened. And someone came up afterwards, and I said, how was it? And they said, you flew around the stage. It was amazing. And the audience laughed, and it all just kind of clicked. And I was like, why don't they share this with us somehow? This is amazing. This is the same thing. Like, wow. Life-changing. Road to Damascus moment, if you're biblical, or catching a wave on a surfboard for the first time if you're not, you know, like it just, my eyes opened to the possibilities of what these dusty books can actually be the key to, which is joyful, reflective togetherness. And I've never wanted to do anything else or experience anything else since. And indeed, you know, I love writing, I love teaching and everything, but it is all powering towards either repeating that experience or hopefully shining a light down a path to provide that, to show that people can have a similar sort of experience with Shakespeare too, if they want.
Yeah, it sounds like you always forget. I mean, you never forget when that switch happens and it all makes sense. What?
What was it for you?
Oh gosh.
Yeah, Mike, what was it for you? I want to hear this too.
Well, all right. Well, 2 things that hit me from that, which relates to me a bit, is maybe a slightly different side of the road here, but same street. Is when you're told that this is like a respected thing and it's very important and all that. I'm not speaking for you, but for me, there's almost a knee-jerk reaction to say, "Oh yeah, forget that." You know, almost like a knee-jerk reaction to rebel against whatever the adults are telling you is very important until you figure it out for yourself. But for me, it had to be the first time I wrote something. My first monologue that I wrote myself for theater class. This was before I think I even met Dave, and I did it, and it was the only one in the class who wrote his own monologue. Everybody else kind of picked theirs. And I remember I got like a standing ovation for the first time in my life. And that, of course, was like, okay, this is nice. You know, it's something as silly as people just standing up from a seat when you know that usually they're sitting down. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then luckily I've been able to surf a few waves since, you know, and I still like the water. Yeah. How's that for a metaphor? I'm done. I'm going.
What about you, Dave?
Oh boy.
Yes, Dave. What about you?
It was a very similar experience to you, Ben, but it wasn't Shakespeare. It was the musical Little Shop of Horrors, actually. Well, and it was one of those things. It was like I saw, it was at my high school, which is where I work now. Actually, I went to school in Malvern where I work. I eventually came back. So I saw the high school show when I was in 8th grade, and it was just this. It was Wizard of Oz, and I was sitting in the last row, and it was with my mom, and it was just okay. Let's just go. Impulsive, right? So I saw it, and there was something about the energy between the actors on stage and the audience, and just it, as I was watching it, something just gelled, and I thought to myself, I need to be a part of this somehow. And I had no idea how. I'd never acted before. I'd never even thought about it. Theater wasn't even like in my vocabulary at that point. So then I got to the high school the next year, 9th grade. And I remember there was an open meeting for the musical, just an interest meeting. And so I went to it, and I just sat there in the back. with 30, 40 other people. And the director was my social studies teacher. And this guy would play a large part in my life up until when he died in 2013. So a good like 15 years, this guy mentored me. And so I went up to him and I just said, I want to be a part of the musical. I don't know what I want to do. Can I be a stage manager? And he's like, no, stage management's usually for older kids. I was like, okay. Can I be part of the stage crew? And he said, do you like building things? And I said, no. And he goes, you don't want to be part of the stage crew. I said, okay. So he said, why don't you come to the next meeting that we have for the cast and we'll just see. I was like, okay. So I go to the meeting. Afterwards, he says, stay back. And he asked the other kid who was playing Seymour, the lead, to stay back. And everybody else left. And they went outside the other side of the door. And my director, my teacher, gave me the script that was open to the page of The Evil Dentist. And I said, what do you want me to do? He goes, I want you to read this part with Seymour. I said, okay. So I read it. I didn't think I did very well. I walked out. Everybody was standing by the door, didn't know what was going on. That was my audition, apparently. Yeah. So is this ninth grade kid, tiny, right, with like glasses, kind of similar to this but younger, and the cast list goes up the next day, and I get the part of Oren the dentist, so which was played by Steve Martin in the movie.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I had no idea. So I go through the whole rehearsal process, and I'm like, this is interesting. This is interesting. There's a lot of yelling and tears, and I'm like, is this what theater is? And it was off stage too, which was the interesting part. And so opening night comes, and this is the moment that changed it. I was waiting stage right behind the curtain, and I heard the coughing and the breathing and just the static sounds of the audience. And I took 2 steps out, and the spotlight hit me. And that was it. That was it. The spotlight hits me. I walk out. I say my first lines. Within 30 seconds, I got my first laugh.
Nice.
Done. That was it. I've been chasing that feeling now for 25 years.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
But that's it. That was the switch. And then I was addicted. I was addicted.
So, maybe it's this, right? Because I remember asking someone, why do you like Shakespeare? And they said, because he's amazing, and effervesced about how much I should love him. That and tried to sort of teach me their love. And perhaps the most successful type of Shakespeare teaching, or perhaps it's the most successful type of any teaching, is to show them, is to facilitate their version of these experiences. Perhaps that's why I like sonnets so much, because there's so much opportunity for people to find their own click, their own bit of resonance, and essentially to not teach someone to love Shakespeare, but to help them find their own passion.
Yeah.
For theatre or Shakespeare or whatever. Certainly finding the passion for theatre would make it easier to find the passion for Shakespeare, I suppose.
Right. But for you, did that come simultaneously? Like, did you find the passion for theater and Shakespeare at the same time? Because for me, it was later. It was theater first, and then it was Shakespeare after.
Same, actually. No, you say that. Yeah, same. Huh. Yes. So then I suppose when I came to Shakespeare, and it was like a square peg in a round hole, and then I managed to get was helped to take that wrong sized peg and then put it into the theatre context, and it was like, oh, it fit. Yeah. Right. And I knew what the theatre was. Yeah. It was a relatively familiar dynamic. So yeah, that's interesting. Huh.
What were your first shows that you did before Shakespeare?
Bugsy Malone twice.
Twice?
Yep. Did I do Little Shop of Horrors? Yeah, I'm sure I played in it. I dragged my friends to the audition, so I must have auditioned in it. But I must have played in it. I can't remember what. And Grease,
Mm.
Oliver, Chicago, a lot of musicals.
Wow.
I'm not sure if there was any straight theatre, actually, come to think of it. I think The Tempest might have been my first proper play. I wasn't a strong singer. That's why I was given all the character parts. And then in playing all those different character parts, this director was like, hey, come and do a proper play, as it were.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Can I say, we're talking about music, and I was thinking about, I told Dave this before we started. So I love the American comedian George Carlin a lot. And he said that his grandfather, who was a police officer a long time ago, he used to write out the works of Shakespeare longhanded just to relax, because he liked the way it sounded in the flow. And I was trying to find where my connection is with that influence. So inadvertently, it kind of inspired me, because I would hear George Carlin say, when you're on stage, you're having to learn how to sing as you speak. It's a form of rhetoric, it's auditory. And I think there's no really prime example of that than Shakespeare stuff, Shakespeare work of just, I heard you say it was like jazz almost, the beats.
Yeah.
The way can you talk a little bit about that, about the
sure,
the importance of that?
I remember the lesson when the teacher said to me, ambit pentameter. And I said, what is that? And she went, well, it means, her version of a line of rhythmical poetry with a regular rhythm. And the rhythm is da-dum, 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 da-dum. And she sort of left it there and wanted to move on. And I said, well, can you have a dum-dee-dum-dee-dum-dee-dum-dee-dum rhythm then? And she said, yeah, and tried to move on. I was like, well, what about dum-dum-dee-dum, and so on and so forth. And then I felt I'd pushed my luck with my classmates by that point. They were just wanting all this to be over. Now, when was it? I suppose it was probably in drama school when someone showed me my first metrical break. And I think I heard Patsy Rodenberg, or maybe it was Sis Berry, the voice practitioners from the RSC and the National Theatre. And so I think it was Sis who said one line of this poetry naturally fills your lungs. And then it would have probably been my father that pointed out that the rhythm of the poetry is the same rhythm as spoken English. He would say, I dropped my phone and cracked the screen today. This is a great one to give to kids, because they go, oh no. And you go, no. I dropped my phone and cracked the screen today. It is the rhythm that we speak in.
Yeah.
And it's the rhythm that we, whether we're conscious of it or not, hear every second of our lives, right? It's the rhythm of our hearts. It's the rhythm of humanity. Now, to give your characters that rhythm to speak is naturally going, within a poetic structure, is naturally going to do two things. On the one hand, it's going to make them sound schmancy, because no one speaks in poetry naturally. And it's going to balance that schmanciness, because there's so much of that rhythm that's familiar and natural that we do and hear without thinking. And it was, I understand, Marlowe who came up with this idea. I'll give my characters this type of rhythm. They'll sound heightened, but they'll also sound more human. And because he was who he was, the rhythm of his speeches would sort of go da-dum, 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 and on and on and on and on and on. And it was celebrated for being so solid and so regular, and something that you could, as you say, relax into, I suppose. And it seems that Shakespeare took that idea and ran with it. And so the rhythm of his speeches, a speech of his might go, da dum da dum da dum da dum da dum, da dum da dum da dum da dum da dum, da dum da dee dee dum da dum da dum. And because everyone, thanks to Marlowe, had been tuned into this rhythm so much, they were hyper tuned to any A rhythm, and they would be like, oh wait, what was the A rhythm there in that dee dee? And the A rhythm would often be underneath the syllables, as it were, of the most important word to that character in that line. And so he was able to manipulate the rhythm to not only push us towards the words that might be more important for the character, but also by breaking that rhythm and staggering the rhythm, it makes, because we're not fluent people. We stutter and stop and start in natural everyday conversation.
Mm-hmm.
The more that you manipulate that, the more that you break up that rhythm, you're closer to creating what the Greeks called stickamithia, which is like fast dialogue. And you're closer to creating an even more human sound. I mean, you compare Sonnet 18, which is pretty darn regular, to Leonti's Too Hot, Too Hot. And that's when you're starting to see this rhythm that goes from da-dum, 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 to dum-dee, dum-dee, da-dee-dum, da-dum, da-dee-dum, da-dum, dum, da-dee-dum, da-dum, da-dee-da, da-da-da, da-da-da, right? And it is like watching any great jazz artist who will either rely on the bassist to do it or set it up themselves. They'll set up the melody, they'll play it again so you know it, and then they can spin off of it, and they'll come back to it and they'll spin off of it, and they'll go all into the sky with it. And then when Miles goes really mad later in his career, he doesn't ever come back to the melody. And I think Shakespeare does the same thing. So it's like this beautiful, incredibly manipulatable instrument. And it's interesting actually that in the sonnets, there's no one sonnet that has the same rhythm as another. In 154 different variations on a theme. Yeah. And some people say he wrote to spread his metrical wings when the theatres were closed, to allow him to start taking those risks that he takes, because within this one idea of 10 syllables, 5 strong beats, 5 weak beats alternating, you have Richard II that's entirely in verse and entirely in rhyme, or almost entirely. In Comedy of Errors, which uses a different sort of rhyme, and Dream, which uses rhyme and prose and song, and suddenly he's turning this jazz into a kind of orchestra of different, like quills or something, you know. It's really kind of remarkable, and all of these different rhythms, it seems that he managed to almost give a different rhythm to every single character he wrote. So he's really making these characters as individual human people as possible, and that, I suppose, ties back to why it's easier, it feels good when that mirror is held up, because these people feel like real people. And all of these things are such a country mile away from iambic pentameter means de-dum, 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 de-dum.
Mm-hmm. Are there any characters that are written in straight iambic pentameter without any derivation at all?
Great question. I'd imagine so. I wonder, I mean, certainly they say that his poetry, his verse becomes more and more and more as he progresses, more adventurous. Mm-hmm. So maybe some of the early characters, but I've been digging into the Henry VI plays recently, and he seems to be pretty adventurous from an early go. I do know that Lear ends with an inversion of this. One of Lear's last lines is never, 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 never. And that has a natural trochaic rhythm. So iambic is de-dum, 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 de-dum. And the line never, 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 never has to have dum-dee, 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 dum-dee.
That's right before he dies?
Right before he dies.
Interesting.
His whole world flipped upside down and inside out, and so is his verse. I don't know if there's a speech that's entirely in that reversed rhythm, but there's snatches of all different types, and it does seem to reflect the heartbeat of the character. It seems to reflect their pulse.
Mm. Or the reverse heartbeat right before he dies. That's very interesting. And it's almost symbolic.
As he's having a heart attack, they say.
Yeah, that is interesting. So you said that Marlowe popularized the iambic pentameter, the straight lines of iambic pentameter. Henry VI, I think, wasn't just recently came out that they were co-written with Christopher Marlowe.
Mm-hmm.
So, being that's one of his earlier works and that it was co-written with Marlowe, is that perhaps more? Did you find any indication that that's straight iambic pentameter, or that there's a less experienced playwright working there, or anything like that? I'm not sure what I'm trying to say.
No, I understand. There's lots of signs that the same things that you might find, metrical breaks, gaps in the meter, opportunities for pauses, really well written, fleshed out minor characters that have their own unique turns of phrases, lovely twists and turns. All of the things that you might hope and expect to find in a Shakespeare play are in the Henry Sixes. They're in Henry VI 1. Every now and again, you seem to get this really clunky scene. And the temptation is to say, oh, that was by a co-writer, because we don't like to think Shakespeare wrote bad stuff. But, go and read Merry Wives of Windsor. He wrote a lot of terrible things as well, which is great. It makes him human,
Right.
Which is important when you're approaching Shakespeare, not to keep him up there on that dais, right? Mm-hmm. There are some not great scenes, and there are some not great bits of writing. And then all of a sudden, the play kind of wriggles around Act 4 into something else, into something really, really quite exceptional. So I'd kind of be tempted to say there's some Marlowe in there, there's some Shakespeare in there. I wouldn't be surprised if it was one of those plays that was consortium. The early playwright stable was, I believe, under, people would be under the wing. You'd have a mentor writer like Marlowe that would come in and do what he's really good at. And of course, Marlowe was a really good poet. He was not a good playwright. Dramaturgically, his plays aren't great. So maybe there was someone doing the 5-act structure, someone else working the plot, someone else doing the cool bits of dialogue, someone else doing the nice monologues. Shakespeare fixing bits and pieces here and there, and maybe it was his play. I don't know, but it's a great piece, but it's a much worked on thing. I think it's not perfect yet. Nor should it be. It's an early play. He's certainly not the only author on it. And I came to that feeling without the computer analysis that. Of the findings that you found. I think they talk about the golden era of Shakespeare. I can tell what Shakespeare wrote and all that sort of thing. You just get a sense that it's not quite gelling until about 2/3 of the way through, with these little flashes of wonderment.
Well, he was still learning his craft at that point, right? When he was early on.
Yeah, absolutely. And continued too. I think progressing through the canon chronologically has taught me that he's David Bowie. Every
excellent comparison.
he comes up with something that's great. He does it and then moves on. There is no, like, from comedy in Richard and Dream, he's playing around with rhyme in a particular way and never really returns to it in the same manner. And the philosophical deeps he dives into around Hamlet and As You Like It and that sort of thing. It's like Bowie. It's like, this is who I am in this play. Done. Moving on. Gonna reinvent myself. Done. Moving on. Gonna reinvent myself. Gonna keep pushing the boundaries. Like, Henry VI 1. It may not be the most solidly written piece all the way through. But there's a scene right at the end when Suffolk meets Margaret, and he's going to capture this French princess, and because he falls in love with her straight away, and he thinks, I want her, I'm going to woo her and get her to marry the king, and then I can kind of keep by her because I love her, even though she's not really a princess. And he's sort of saying all of this to us whilst in conversation with Margaret. But when he talks to us in a side, she starts talking to us and says, who's he talking to? And you've got this kind of, the theatrical device of talking aside to the audience, standard. All Shakespeare soliloquies were designed for the character to open their heart up and get feedback from the audience. But the meta of a character noticing another character in a side and asking the audience who they're to. I mean, this is groundbreaking now. Well, not anymore, but you know what I mean? Like, this is one of his first plays. And I throughout the canon, throughout his works, he keeps continually pushing himself and pushing the boundaries of what he and his actors can do and what theatre can do and what theatre is. And so for that reason, he bowed to me, because why repeat yourself? What's the point, right?
How much did the other actors have, like how much influence did they have in the final completed works that they performed? Because they're the quarto editions, and then there are a variety of different editions that eventually wind up in the folio. So,
sure.
You know, and I'm not, this is not an authorship question at all. I believe Shakespeare is Shakespeare. But given the type of theater that they did and the collaboration that was common back then, how much input do you think the other actors had in what they performed on stage? Like how much of Burbage is actually in Hamlet?
Yeah, right. Short answer, we'll never know. Long answer, everything I've learned about ensemble work and approaching Shakespeare through ensemble work. And when we play, we try and pretend that Shakespeare's in the room. Is it okay to cut this, Shakespeare? This line is a bit funky. Could we improve on it? All of that sort of stuff. They were all in the same space together for 20 years. And certainly two of them made sure, at least two of them made sure that the works were collated and collected and available to be published. There's an understanding that he would have brought them a new play, read it to them, well, because there would be a small body of people who had a share in the building, and they would perhaps, if any kind of artistic programming would be going on, maybe it would be happening there. What does the company want to do next? Different when you don't own your own theatre, if you're pitching to someone like Henslow, or he's commissioning. But let's say that we're at the Globe and the sharers are sort of planning the next play, and Shakespeare goes, yeah, I think we could do with a comedy now. We've had a bit of tragedy. Let's do something like this. And he goes off and writes it and then presents it by reading it to everybody. And then that would have been, the parts would have been handed, or the play script would have been, as it was, would have been handed around, and everyone would write out their own parts. And then at that point, no one else has your lines. There's no book. Well, there is a book holder, they say, on stage for any mistakes or what have you, and props and that sort of thing. There are so many schools of thought about it, but it feels unlikely that they would have prompted necessarily, because they know that some of the plays were reconstituted from these separate acting parts, like a jigsaw puzzle. The feeling that feels right is that the parts with the actors' parts, that they would have done what they were good at. Certainly once, in the early days, before Shakespeare was a sharer, he would have written a play, sold it to the theatre company, and then had no copyright control over it at all. And then that theatre company, once they'd rinsed it, would decide whether or not they wanted to sell it to a publisher. If they sold it to a publisher, the playwright would get no fee from that. It is the companies. And I like that idea that he goes, I got this idea, here's a 4-hour text of Hamlet. You guys do what you're good at and make it the best 2 hours traffic of our stage. Now, to the degree to which bits would be rewritten or embellished or improved on and go, hey, Shakespeare, can we do that? Or we just change it? Don't know. But seeing the way that his writing changes as the ensemble changes makes me think that that there was a tremendously intense collaboration going on between those 20 or so people, and a huge amount of back and forth, and that he excelled by helping them excel, and they excelled by helping him excel, and it was entirely symbiotic. Yeah, that feels right. It's a nice romantic idea to imagine him up in his garret by himself, and I'm sure he spent a lot of time up there.
Yeah.
But the rough-hewn stone, I imagine, would have been sculpted into a beautiful statue together in that space.
Mm-hmm.
If we had a time machine and we brought Shakespeare back and you guys are hanging out in a room listening to some David Bowie, what would you want to talk to him about? What would be your questions? Because I know like there's a lot of heroes that I looked up to from a different time who I would love to chill with and just talk to. Has that?
Who's your number one?
Silly question, but what would you like to talk to him about?
Question. Who's your number one?
Was that? Sorry.
I said it's a beautiful question, but who's your number one?
It changes with the weather. I would talk to, well, right now, if I had like a dinner party or something, I would have Rod Serling from the Twilight Zone.
Nice.
Hunter S. Thompson and Carlin. Yeah, that would be, and let's throw Bob Marley in there too. Why not? It's you know.
Sure, I'm coming to that party. That'll be fun.
Okay, cool. When all this is over, you're invited. But yeah, what would you like to talk to me about?
Well, I've met a couple of my heroes, and it wasn't all great. And you know, you mentioned earlier, Dave, the conspiracy theories. You know, like we desperately, so badly want to know who Shakespeare was, and I always say, does it matter? Like, we'd have to find out that he was some terrible necrophiliac serial killer or something to change our adoration of this guy.
It would be amazing if we discovered that.
and I don't care about the conspiracy theories because it's more important to me to put energy into keeping these works alive and keeping them accessible and finding different ways to create bridges. Too much focus on the mortal behind the works can damage the works. I mean, big questions at the moment continue about Michael Jackson. You know, I would hate to meet him and be really disappointed that he's
he might not like David Bowie.
Grumpy asshole, you know? That just and yet he's human, and he probably was at times, you know. So let's say that I can deal with what sort of person he might end up being, because I don't want to know. Perhaps rather than meet him, maybe I could write him a note, write him a question. I would ask him, it would be something like, what's your favorite part you've played, or what are the different things you love about acting and writing, that moment when you stopped acting and carried on writing, or what time, you know, what time of day do you like to write best? Something like that. Something that might get him to speak a little bit about the engine behind all of this, what drove him to do it. He talks a lot about muses and that kind of thing, but one of the most profound things in my young Shakespearean life was watching Joe Fiennes in Shakespeare in Love, and that scene where he's up in the garret and he's pacing back and forth and he spins around and does with the quill and his fingers are all ink stained, and I'm like, yeah, man, I'm a process geek, you know. So much of our Shakespeare work in the ensembles I curate are about looking at all these different Elizabethan processes as far as we understand them and seeing how we can adapt them to make modern shows. And yeah, because I'm a writer as well, I'd be keen to somehow get a view into his process, I guess, and stay away from his politics. What about you, Dave? Who would you sit down with if you could?
Oh my God. Well, after all that, I don't know if I want to sit down with anybody. I'm afraid what they'd say. Because I'm going through my head and saying, man, everybody I would sit down with are probably giant assholes. Like John Lennon would be on that list, but I know what I'd be getting into. like I know how that would go, but I'd still want to do it.
Yeah.
I think Einstein would be on that list, but also probably a huge dick.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to sit with like Salvador Dali and hear him talk about rhinos, Dave?
I'd probably go to the beach with Picasso. That'd be interesting, I think.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Or Michelangelo maybe while he's working and just hang out with him. I don't know. I like people who are talented. I admire talent.
Mm-hmm.
And because especially those who are more talented than I am, who can do things I can't and I can't imagine doing. I don't know. I'm drawn to those people.
Mm-hmm.
There's also something comforting to know that they exist, even though you're not in the same time. The fact that there's some sort of recorded evidence that somebody once felt some sort of similar feeling that you feel now is it's kind of magical. I mean, it's a message in a bottle and through time, and then you read it and you're like, oh, okay, somebody else was like that. Don't feel so alone.
I mean, that you've just encapsulated perfectly why I love the Shakespearean canon, which is filled to clinking with these little messages in the bottle of this is how I feel right now. And it seems like he had this weird ability to tap into the human condition and express it. And I kind of don't, like, you meet someone and it's like, well, is this going to give me a better insight into him or the works? Like, if I got him to read To Be or Not to Be, would it help me understand the speech any better, or would it help me understand him? I don't really want to understand him. I don't need to. I want to understand the speech better. But then the speech only works because it can be picked up and spoken by anybody. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I know my dad would want to meet him. My dad he doesn't care about all of the things that I just said. He would quite happily sit in the room and let Shakespeare be an asshole for an hour.
You've done a lot of work with your dad, right? Like, you've done a lot of collaborations with him.
Very lucky to do so. Yeah, absolutely.
What's that like? Like, what's the dynamic working with your father? Like, how do you separate the professional work environment from the family relationship?
Yeah, it's we've worked hard at it. It's hard. Mm-hmm. I feel, on the one hand, so lucky. I mean, I started working with Dad in this way when I was 21, and we, I'd helped him with, when he wrote a linguistics book for 13-year-olds, and I was 13. I read it and I'm getting feedback on it. And when he was editing encyclopedia and I needed some pocket money when I was 16, 17, I'd sit in this office and data input, but that's working for him. Mm-hmm. And when we came up with the idea for the dictionary, and we got to work together. Yeah, it was hard, but my father became my friend, and my folks are my friends, which I'm so grateful for. And for him, he had never really collaborated before, so it was really exciting for him too. And we recognized that on the one hand, we had a 20-something-year-old actor and a 50-something-year-old academic, one with a Latin background and Greek and everything else, and one without. And if we were to find a medial point and aim for that with the dictionary, then we might be sort of setting a good place for everybody. And so one of the first things we talked about was, I said, we have to put goth into the dictionary because of Titus Andronicus and everything. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, no one knows what goth means. He said, yeah, they do. Goth's a tribe from the early BC, whatever. And I was like, no. Goths are folk that hang out in Camden Town in London wearing punk makeup and black and watch The Crow and that sort of thing, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was the thing. That was the cornerstone of our approach, essentially, that we have these two different ways in.
Yeah.
And on the other side, Dad's never really had much experience of people disagreeing with him. Or if they do disagree with him, who cares? Because it's his book. So there were some good degrees of negotiation. It takes, for someone who I've looked up to for so long and respect the authority and the intelligence of, it took some girding of my loins to be brave enough to go, essentially, you're wrong. And I probably didn't phrase it very well because I was young, but it was really tremendous and entirely nourishing and it was and I'm sure entirely because he was incredibly patient and generous, and was excited because I suppose I was bringing the theatrical perspective and he had the linguistic as well. So we had a generational cross section, and we also had the kind of, because I've sometimes folk have very kindly said that my work is deceptively scholarly, but I would never pretend to be a scholar or an academic. I don't have the head or the background. I'm a theatre person with an actor's heart, and but it does seem to be a good fusion of talents, and yeah, we get on all right. We get on.
Well, you're stuck there with him for months and months and months, so you should hopefully get along with him.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're cooking up all sorts of different ideas for projects, and I'm hopeful that we'll get to write together again.
That's great.
Done 3 or 4 books now, and it would be nice to do something else together. And then, you know, as he was invited by the Globe in 2004 to develop original pronunciation, it's been wonderful. And then he worked on the European explorations. There's been some back and forth. So he got invited by the Globe. And it was interesting, but sort of also something Dad was doing. And also I was a bit jealous because he got to the Globe before me. And then more and more interest sparked in original pronunciation. And we found ourselves exploring it in the ensemble I was curating. And then he would be the master of pronunciation and then maybe take a small part. So that we kept sort of collaborating in different ways together. And it's been a really, really lovely journey so far. And yeah, I hope we get to explore some more. But watching him essentially develop a whole new field of original practice academically has been a joy. And then I hope he's been enjoying me sort of take that information and try to develop it and adventure in it and see how far it can be pushed.
Does he have any theater background at all, or?
Dad, yeah. He after I did The Tempest in that first repertory company, I think a year or so later we did The Merchant of Venice, and Dad did Shylock, and I played one of the salads.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Dad has been amateur acting since he was in high school, I think, so younger.
Oh.
So he was in that production of The Tempest. He was Gonzalo,
Oh.
the Polonius sort of character.
Mm-hmm.
Mom was Miranda. It was a family affair.
Oh wow, your mom was in it too. No kidding. Oh wow.
Yeah. So there's theater in the blood, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you guys got theater in the family?
No. No, my dad was well, he's retired now, but he was a nurse for most of his career, and then he went into academia and became a dean of a nursing school here.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so he got his PhD and all that. I mean, he's academic, and he was a top in his field for what he did.
Wow.
He has more of the science brain. My mom's a teacher, and my sister is into theater only because I am, and I take her along on on what I do. But yeah, no, I have some cousins who are actors. I have one who is teaching puppetry at a university in Chicago. So
Really?
Yeah.
Which university?
Oh, geez. I'd have to look that up.
Let me know another time. It's just my partner's a puppeteer, and one of my best friends is a puppet maker, and we've worked in different places in Chicago with different universities and puppet schools and stuff. So.
Oh, really? Okay. There's probably some crossover there. I'll look it up and I'll email you later because I'm sure that there's some crossover. Yeah, but that's really it. I mean, I
what
just
about
discovered
you, Mike?
it.
Where's your theater? Do you have much theater ancestry? Or?
Not really, but like both my parents, especially my mom's side, they have like, I like to say this, I got my sense of humor from my mom, but my comedy education from my dad. That makes sense. So, because my dad is a cameraman for television, so he would work for a lot of these comedy shows like Comedy Central, or I mean, you name it, he did it. So as a kid, I would go and sit in the audience or just sit backstage and sit during rehearsal, just study the hell out of all this stuff. So that was kind of when I started changing my mind of what theater is, because I've said this to Dave before, but it wasn't cool, right? Whatever that means when you're a kid. So, and Dave, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but I say this, in school, you do something in class, you get thrown into detention, you do on stage, you get called talented. So once where I figured where it was okay to talk back was, improv. And so once I started seeing that at my dad's job, there's an audience and there's people performing, then that's theater, isn't it? All right. I mean, it's just different. So that's kind of the closest I would say to that kind of thing, but nobody else really does, quote unquote theater in my family. Yeah.
It's funny where.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's where the appreciation comes from, and just studying people's work ethic and dedication to this kind of thing. It's you latch on to somebody you look up to, and it's like a nice little lighthouse.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of these things and feelings, we haven't changed that much as a species in the last 400 years. This must have been the kind of things that Shakespeare felt. There's Richard Burbage. His father toured to Stratford-on-Avon around the time that Richard and Will were about the same sort of age. You imagine these two little boys meeting each other just before Shakespeare's dad was the mayor of the town, or he was high up in the council, I think. So they probably would have had plum seats. They would have met the people that you meet and the things that they spark in you, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What's that thing we say, Mike? You have to learn it from somebody. Like this isn't just it's not genetic necessarily. Like this is a craft, and you have to pass it from one generation to another, and you have to learn it and work in it and appreciate it.
Craft is a word that's been echoing with me for the last few years. We took some shows to Japan last year, and the Japanese have a word for craftsman, which is shokuni, which is a really highly respected title that can be applied to anyone in any field, not just things that you might make with your hands. And it reminds me that these men at the time dismantled their theatre and rebuilt it, you know, and dismantled plays into parts and rebuilt them.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, going back to that collaboration idea, you know, they were masters of craft, and a craft that they were continually honing and desperately keen to improve on, not least because they would have needed it to pay the bills, put bread on the table. But there seemed, if there's something that I'm left with after 20 years of looking at these works from the theatrical perspective, is just a huge passion for craft and collaboration and entertainment.
Mike, you got any questions, man?
No, I got pretty good. That was kind of everything. What? Oh yeah, favorite Shakespeare death. Why not?
There you go. I knew it. I knew it.
Yeah.
I was like, he's waiting on that one.
Okay, but favorite, but because they're so horrible.
Yeah.
There's so many. Multiple sorts of pikes through the body is pretty awful. Coriolanus dying. I think swallowing hot coals, Portia in Julius Caesar. It's reported.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be pretty gruesome. But I think the most horrible death in one of the most insidious scenes, actually it's also Julius Caesar, is when the mob kill Cinna the poet, because he's got the same name as one of the conspirators.
Right.
And it's funny that he's a poet, but this person that is essentially trying to express the human condition through his own heart is sort of trapped and then torn apart by a mob and dies protesting his innocence, which happens all the time. It's too real. It's too unfair. The injustice, the unfairness of it, the innocence pleading against uncaring people that want to just hurt and get out their pain, frustration and happiness. You know, those are often the stories that affect me the most. When people are hunted down like that, it's just awful. And certainly there were lots of people being hunted down in Shakespeare's time for their religion or witches or whatever. But there's something worse about the fact that I've got the same name. I'm a poet. Yeah, I hate that. I really, really, really hate that scene. Because it's so powerful. And I don't think we even get to see the death. But yeah, something like that.
That's nice. All right, cool.
What about you?
Well, now I feel like I'm living the nightmare of that guy that you just said, so I'm going to go with that one. I'm like picturing everything. It's me, it's there. I'm like trapped in front of a 7-Eleven. It's awful. What about you, Dave?
Oh my favorite death. See, Ben, I thought you were going to Titus like right away. Honestly, like just a list of Titus. Too easy. No, you went with the emotional death. That was good.
Yeah, that's gonna stay with me now. Jesus.
Yeah, I should. Oh my God.
That'll replace the goblin in my dreams.
Right. See, the scene that pops out to me right away, and it's not even a death, but it's when Kent gets his eyeballs plucked out in Lear.
Oh, Gloucester, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Gloucester, right? Not Kent. Was it? Yeah, it's Gloucester, right?
Yeah.
When he gets his eyeballs plucked out. It's not even a death, but it's just gruesome. Favorite death. Jesus. I don't know. Another one that jumps out. Richard II. I believe he dies of a broken heart, or right? Or was he murdered?
Oh,
that sticks out to me.
Richard is murdered, but Anthony's pal, whose name begins with a B, I think, dies of a broken heart.
Okay, yeah.
In Antony and Cleopatra. I remember watching this magnificent actor play it once, and he's giving the last speech, and he he punches himself in the chest. He breaks his own heart.
Mm. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. That's right.
It's a nice light note.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
What? Sorry, Dave. I didn't know you didn't know death existed, but yeah.
Of course I do. I read Shakespeare.
Is there a certain like TV actor or film actor that when they recite Shakespeare you like the most? Like I always like when Anthony Hopkins somehow starts doing Shakespeare out of nowhere, and I dig that. Or there's a clip I saw not that long ago. It was a Dick Cavett clip, and Olivier was on it, and he went into a whole thing. Like, is there certain people you're like, oh yes, okay, that guitar is played by the right guy right now?
I really, and if you haven't seen it already, Tony Hopkins did a Lear last year that was great.
Oh, okay, I gotta look at that.
Really beautiful.
Cool.
Yeah.
He played it as if he had Alzheimer's, and rather than madness, which caused a lot of dispute because. Anyway,
I gotta check that out.
It's down the road, Vince. Down the road. A friend of mine for Shakespeare's birthday this year invited everyone to record a line of Shakespeare that they loved, and she composited it all together. And I got to see 100 people from 100 different walks of life, none of whom seemed to be particularly well versed in Shakespeare, all shapes, sizes, and ages, delivering lines that meant something to them. And it was probably the most solid 15 minutes of great Shakespeare speaking I've heard. I love it. I love it when I get to hear people using their own voice, not their Shakespeare voice, their own accent, speak a line of Shakespeare from the heart. It's just everything to me.
That's great.
It's what I reach for when I'm playing a part as well, is to just try and tune into that simplicity of short-circuiting the heart to the mouth without the brain getting in the way. I grew up loving Branagh and Judi Dench and Ian McKellen. I think one of my favorites is perhaps Ian McKellen's opening speech in the film he did of Richard III.
Oh, yes.
Because he's
an original take.
He's all dressed up. He's coming out of a party. He goes into the loo. He uses the urinal, but he's only got one arm. And as he's fluffing himself before the mirror, he reaches into his coat, pulls out a cigarette case, takes a cigarette, closes the case, pulls out a really schmancy lighter, and then does that thing that people can do with one hand, like flicks it open, lights the thing, shuts it and puts it back in. But what he does is this, something like this. And you're like, you're disabled, aren't you? Oh God, you're terrifying, you know? And it was such a lovely bit of stagecraft underneath such beautiful verse speaking. And it was like, don't judge the book by its cover, my friends. It was that fusion of craft again, I suppose. Yeah. You got a favorite?
You doing okay with all the theaters closed right now? You all right? Says it all, dude.
That's all of it. That's all you need to say.
Says it all.
You know, there aren't any theatres where I am. I'm in North Wales. The Arts Centre, of course, is closed, where there would be some theatres sometimes. My dear friend said to me the other day, at the beginning of this lockdown, is there any theatre in the world at the moment? Is there anywhere in the world where people are performing in the same room as people who are listening? And there are little fragments of it in little spaces and that sort of thing. And there are lots of theatrical endeavors ongoing and lots of digital theatrical reaches. But my craft is not only on hold, it could be over. I mean, there are so many beautiful big theatres that are struggling to keep themselves going.
The Globe.
The Globe being one of them, yeah, absolutely. There are lots of medium-sized theatres that, you know, the big theatres can put out some of their archive if they have the wherewithal to do it. The medium-sized theatres may not have that archive and don't have the funds to produce anything. And there's lots of smaller sized theatre companies that are trying to produce and push out through this.
Yeah.
And they're all reaching approximations of what theatre is, but I mean, most of the producers are talking about not being able to get going again for at least a year, let alone when social distancing allows and all this kind of thing. And it's you know, we spend our lives trying to avoid this moment. We work really hard. We're self-employed. It's like, I'm just gonna keep going. I'm gonna keep empowering. I'm gonna make sure that this desolate wasteland of no work is avoided, to keep myself in this business and to keep bread on the table and to be a successful actor. And I think to be a success in theatre means you're doing it. You're not necessarily being paid for it, but you're just getting to do it as much as possible. That's success. And yeah, I mean, there are some countries that are pouring money into the culture and the arts because they understand society's desperate need for it. That it is a place for us to relax and release and be challenged and be held and be dangerous and be safe and all of these things. And so much of theatre and the arts can be the powerhouse through which all of the other things like the economy and everything else can truly breathe and live, because the people that are running them are beautiful, well-rounded individuals that perhaps have had theatre enrich their lives in some way. And there isn't a future that seems to be happening for at least another year or so. So I'm doing my level best not to think too much about what the future holds, because we're in such a situation that we can't possibly predict it. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit of a futile waste of energy. But yeah, it's scary to think that one of the last things that may be able to come back is theatre. And I don't know how many institutions are going to be able to survive that long. And I certainly know that the one thing that is missing from making this theatrical is the difficulty, and it's not impossible, but the difficulty to be able to do things that carry atmosphere despite lag and bandwidth, and with that atmosphere carry into empathy. And without those two things, we're making theatrical things, but we're not making theatre. So yeah, it's really worrying. And I feel very, very grateful to have the support I have. And I've got a huge amount of empathy and sympathy for all of my colleagues around the world who may never get to do it again because of this experience. So it's bewildering. And to, especially when so many of us are doing it not for money, not for fame, but because they have to. Like you said about writing, right? It's just, I gotta do this.
Absolutely.
So yeah, man, we're thinking of ways of how to create despite this, through this, with this, embrace this, and still make and still entertain. And it's dark times at the moment, but it happened to Shakespeare. Their theatres were put on hold for 18 months frequently. And out of those hiatuses, some really beautiful creations happened. So it's miserable and it's awful, and I just hope that through this dip, something magnificent will come back. Maybe every government will suddenly go, my God, why aren't we spending all of our money on the health system and the arts rather than guns and banks? But you know, that's probably a pipe dream.
Yeah. Thanks, Ben.
Oh man, like thank you guys. It's lovely to connect.
And so everything just froze on me. We're good? Everyone's still there?
Yep.
Please?
Yep,
Good.
we're
Okay, thank God. I don't know what just happened. Thanks, man. That was a great answer. I think we're I don't know. I guess we're all I mean, like what Mike and I are doing every week is we're doing these little radio plays, and that the only reason we're doing that is just to do it. Like it's just to do it. It's even like mostly a social thing, just to connect with other people. You know, like we're just grabbing scripts and we're just doing little plays, and that's it. You know, 10, 12 people at a time,
and it's shit and it's awkward, and maybe you get like 0.1% of that feeling that you'd normally get, but that little 0.1% is golden.
yeah,
right? It's golden.
It's creating that illusion that everything is still okay, that we're still doing it, you know. Meanwhile, but who knows? But you never know. I have this feeling, and I think I told you this yesterday, Mike, that since there are so many people who want this to continue, who want theater to come out on top at the end, that no matter what, some point in the future, it will, because people need it to. You know, whether even if a bunch of Broadway houses close down and some companies fold, you know, it's collateral damage, I suppose, but enough people need this to happen, so it will. And I have that very strong feeling that that's going to be the case, that somebody is going to rise up and take control of it, or some group of people, and there will be a light at the end of all of this.
Yeah. Great.
This is my thought. I don't know. But anyway, let's end on a high note. All right, rapid fire, Ben. I got 4 questions for you.
Oh, okay.
All right, rapid fire. Which Shakespeare character is the most relevant today?
Oh, jeez.
so much for rapid.
I was about to caveat the rapid fire. I was like, I genuinely don't know. I know I don't give short answers to anything, but I'm going to do my best. And then you open with that. Most relevant. I mean, Hamlet's the everyman, right? Everyone can play any part these days, but Hamlet is the everyman that speaks for us all and asks the big questions. But perhaps the most relevant, especially what we've just been talking about, why didn't I say Feste? The epitome of laughter in the face of death, of mourning, of grief, of unreciprocated love, unrequited love. It can go away, and then it can come back, and our hearts can be full of joy again. And it can play in every house, whether it's blue or red, and there you go. And heal all. So yeah, let's go for Feste.
Nice answer. I wasn't expecting that. That was good. Most relevant play today?
Well, a couple of years ago, it was Timon. Great production of Timon, where it was set in one world against the backdrop of the recession and the banks falling and that kind of thing. Oh. Individual being very generous and then going back to his banks in it, but not, yeah. Right now, the most relevant play. Maybe it's Lear. You know, with the landscape swept flat and bare, and no gods to help you out, and at the end of it all, everything is utterly changed forever, with hope in it too, but an entirely holistic ripple that affects everybody. you know, but with, rather than it being about one figure going through it all, you know, Lear sort of is us all, perhaps. I don't know, I'm reaching a little bit, but some people were, one of the best things I read in the first few weeks of this whole thing, this lockdown, was in the, I think it was the Harvard Business Review, and the title said, "The thing that you're experiencing is grief."
Yes, I've read that.
It was a beautiful piece, and it talked about all the different stages of grief that you go through when you're grieving. And I looked around myself and me and everyone else was going through one of those different stages as this developed.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a kind of madness that keeps overwhelming people, it seems. Just the flash of it. Everything's fine for the most part. But people talk about this sudden wave of being overwhelmed with grief or with sadness or madness. And yeah, there's something of the tsunami, I suppose, that is calling a lot of people to think about clearing the decks and starting over. So maybe Lear. I love Lear.
That sounds beautifully fitting and poetic. Didn't he write that in quarantine, or isn't that like the legend that he wrote it while quarantined for the plague? He's frozen.
Hello?
Oh, there we go. He's back.
Yeah. The last thing I heard you say was poetic.
Poetic. Oh yeah, and then I asked about how fitting it is, because wasn't Lear written during a time of plague?
So they say.
That's what they say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a good. That's a good fit.
Yep.
And I don't think we've even asked this. What's your favorite Shakespeare play?
It's Lear.
It's Lear.
It's Lear.
It's the one I studied in as a senior. It's the one that cemented the hatred right before the Tempest, and before I got cast in the Tempest. And then 6 or 7 or 8, 10 years later, maybe, I got cast as Edgar. Best art, nobleman, madman,
Yeah.
warrior, king, big fight. Get to run around, pretend to be mad, get to be a bit geeky at the beginning. What a great part. And that cliff-top goodbye scene with Gloucester, just, it was the first time, you know, they say there's a difference between playing emotion and letting the words that you speak affect you. And it was the first time I understood what that meant. And I started weeping and couldn't stop.
Wow.
It was life-changing. Also, we raised it in a week. It was one of the first quick raises.
Oh.
We did the whole thing up and down in 15 days with 5 performances in a mountain in Austria, rehearsing in a castle. And it profoundly changed my acting life. It changed my understanding of what could be achieved in a short space of time to such a high degree of level. And it was the play that I long disliked. And it felt like I had reached the other end of an arc. So a few years after that, I tattooed "Nothing Will Come of Nothing" on my arm.
Oh, cool.
Oh, that's what's on there. Oh, wow.
Cool.
And it's my dad's writing, my grand's and my mom's, so I've always got my family with me.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And it reminds me, you can change your mind about things. And as a self-employed creative, if I don't get out of bed and make something happen, nothing's gonna happen.
Right. Well said. That's great.
Yeah. So, yeah, Lear is, and also, I don't think there's a better play in the canon that, you know, it has a great lead plot that is pretty solid. There aren't many holes in it, like Hamlet. There's a great subplot that mirrors it with Edgar and Gloucester and Edmund. There's great prose, poetry, song. There's nearly a sonnet. It's really funny. It's really sad. And there's a massive fight at the end. I mean, it's a kind of perfect play. It's got all the right ingredients and they're all kind of nicely balanced.
Yeah. And,
you know, comedy is a beautifully crystalline piece of writing. There's lots of brilliant bits of writing, but I think that might be one of the best plays. So yeah, Lear's. I'm trying to be short-answered. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. No, hey, we didn't know where to go. Where are we going? We're stuck inside all day. Oh man. All right.
There was one more.
Go. There was? Yes. Most sympathetic character. I think I know the answer already.
Go on.
No, I think I know what I'm thinking.
What were you thinking?
I'm thinking Lear.
Mm.
I was thinking Norman Lear.
Yeah.
Do you have one, Mike?
Sympathetic character? Not at the moment. No, I can't. I know I will know it when this is over, or when I'm about to go to sleep, and I'm like, damn it, I should have said that, you know, because I don't know.
Well, yes, I'd love to say Lear, and yet I know that I won't be able to truly sympathize with him until I become a father, maybe.
Mm.
And there's a difference, right? Because, you know, Shakespeare didn't have to go to Italy to write Merchant of Venice.
Right.
Because imagination, and I don't have to become a father to truly get Lear, but and maybe that's a tricky thing, right? Because trying to say who's the most sympathetic, it sort of depends on who you resonate. It's back to that beautiful mirror, I suppose.
It's a personal question. It's a very personal question.
So who's the most sympathetic character for me at the moment? Well, you know what? It's not because of who I am or where I am in my life, I'm glad to say. But I got to play Richard II a couple of years ago and knew that the verse was very, very rich and beautiful. And had enjoyed Sam West play it a few years ago, and I was excited by the part. Even though the play's a bit tricksy and that opening act or two is kind of dense if you don't really know your English history. But as we worked on it, I realized it's a play about a god trying to understand how to be mortal. It's like Christopher Reeve in Superman 2, giving it his superpowers. And this person, this entity who knows that the crown that he's been born with is a direct link to God, and that he is in some respects the walking incarnation of God. And then to step aside from that and not know anything, like how to eat, how to interact with people, what do we like to be touched, to think and feel and be normal, and still not really truly be able to step away from all of that shining glory and what it stands for as well. It was I remember me and Rob, the director, just sort of sat down one day and went, the poor guy, like, what a horrible sort of process to go through to try and understand what it is to be human if you're an adult and you've never really had an experience of it. Nicolas Cage did it really badly in the film City of Angels when the angel became a human. Loved that film when I was younger. But yeah, I thought I've got huge sympathy for Lear being treated badly, and I got sympathy for the friar in Romeo and Juliet screwing up, and my sympathy abounds through Shakespeare. And perhaps it's that there's so much of Richard which is hard to make tangible, because how on earth can we ever relate to being a king? How can we as actors tune our heads and our hearts to a place where that crown isn't something that we show, hey, I'm king, I'm wearing a crown, but it just is. The crown sits on your heart, not on your head. You know, it is golden blood that flows through your veins. That's such a big acting leap, and then to sort of take that step down to mortality was a really delicious part to play. So maybe that's why it resonates now.
See that.
I'm going to carry that question and keep thinking about it. Thank you.
Good. Good. I think it's a very personal question, and
Yeah.
and we just connect to it as people. It's his characters are very human, so we're going to connect.
Also,
to it.
whoever you sympathize with in life says a lot about you. Whoever you feel bad for, feel something for, I think is a reflection of yourself, right?
Yeah.
Adam, in As You Like It, for some reason, always flicks my heartstrings. You know, the old guy that is carried on stage at the end by Orlando and survives miraculously.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this is gonna be one of those questions where I'm gonna be like, oh no, wait. Oh, no.
Exactly. Exactly.
Hey man, it might change every day. Who knows? Every hour.
Yeah.
You know. You know. I can see how you're sympathetic. I don't think I would have pegged Richard II as someone I'm sympathetic towards. I don't know.
Well, no, and he's pretty nasty to begin with, so it's
Right. Yeah, I had a lot of opinions about Richard II when I first experienced it. A lot. I was like, fuck that guy. He deserves it. I don't know. It's just, I don't know. My wife heard all about it.
I don't have necessarily sympathy for him, but Pericles engages my emotions an awful lot. Everything that Pericles goes through it's a proper roller coaster of pain and loss and grief, to the point where he just stops talking. Like,
Yeah.
that's a big ride that guy goes on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, here's one, Rosalind.
Oh, okay.
You know, because she's there, and she's sort of there because she's cousins with Celia, whose father is the Duke and everything, but she doesn't really have parents, she doesn't really have a place, and she's a great character and everything, but she doesn't have a home.
Oh yeah.
I remember thinking that early on, and oh man, Ophelia, what a beautiful creature that is pummeled and pushed around by so many men who deny her to be whoever she is. I mean, she's got such the bad fortune of being born into the second family of a court. And overhearing people talk about things that are so far beyond her ken. It must be, oh, what a miserable existence until she burst into the freedom of madness.
There you go.
Constance and King John stepping forward and delivering the grief was the room of my absent child speech, which is metrically pretty regular and pretty perfect. Like, she is beyond emotional outpouring at that point. She's just in grief. And that simple white noise place of, you have no understanding of what I feel. It's funny. I found myself, partly because the characters I played, leaning towards the male characters, but my sympathies often lie with the female characters because they're put under such duress.
Yeah.
Endless.
All right. Well, damn, that was 2 hours, guys. Wow. Wow.
All right. Good luck with edit.
That's good. Mike, you got anything else?
No, I'm so grateful just to talk to you. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Pleasure meeting you.
Really,
under the circumstances, at least. Thank you.
I hope we might get to meet in real life one day and share a beer or something.
I'd love that. Absolutely.
So,
Yeah. All right, let me stop the recording, guys, before we check off for real. I'm sure it's good.